The most famous image of human evolution was drawn by someone who hated how it turned out. In 1965, artist Rudolf Zallinger produced a fold-out illustration for a Time Life book. 15 figures walking left to right, each one slightly more upright than the last, moving in a steady procession from knuckle-walking ape to modern human. Zallinger had wanted a different arrangement. The linear format was pushed by a paleoanthropologist who used the opportunity to exclude fossils discovered by a rival scientist he personally disliked. The image became the most reproduced visual in the history of science education. It is also, according to the scientific literature, the primary source of the most persistent misconception in all of evolutionary biology. The question this video asks is built on that misconception. Monkeys did not fail to become humans. The question assumes a destination. Evolution does not have one. Here is what the fossil and genetic evidence actually shows. Roughly 6 to 7 million years ago, a population of primates in Africa, living somewhere between forest and open ground, split into two groups that stopped exchanging genetic material. One lineage would eventually produce chimpanzees and bonobos. The other would produce everything scientists classify as hominins, bipedal primates, including every human species that has ever existed. The creature at that fork was neither a monkey nor a human. It looked, in almost every measurable way, like a chimpanzee. The oldest known candidate for that split is a species called Sahelanthropus chadensis. Its remains were excavated from the Jurab Desert in Chad between 2001 and 2002. Its brain measured between 320 and 380 cubic centimeters, the same size as a chimpanzee's. For comparison, the average modern human brain measures approximately 1,350 cubic centimeters. The gap between the two numbers is larger than the entire brain of our earliest known ancestor, and yet, a study published in Science Advances in January 2026, led by researchers at New York University, identified a single anatomical feature in the leg bone of Sahelanthropus that is found exclusively in bipedal hominins. The femoral tubercle, the attachment point for the largest ligament in the human body. The creature walked upright. It also had the brain of a chimpanzee. Those two facts coexisted in the same animal for reasons the field is still working to understand. Scott Williams, the study's lead author, described the animal this way. Sahelanthropus chadensis was essentially a bipedal ape that possessed a chimpanzee-sized brain and likely spent a significant portion of its time in trees, foraging and seeking safety. This is the oldest known member of the human lineage. It walked on two legs and climbed trees and had a brain 1/4 the size of the one being used to read these words. The human lineage did not begin with a dramatic leap towards something recognizably human. It began with an ape that stood up. The standing up part came first. Encephalizations, the dramatic expansion of the brain, came millions of years later and for reasons that were specifically environmental. Starting in the late Miocene, roughly 8 million years ago, the African climate began a prolonged shift toward cooler and drier conditions. Forests contracted. Open woodlands and savannas expanded across East Africa. Stable, isotopic analyses of ancient soils from the Turkana and Olduvai basins, some of the most productive fossil sites in the world, document the progressive replacement of closed forest by open savanna grasslands between 3 and 2 million years ago, with further expansion documented at 1.8 million, 1.2 million and 600,000 years ago. Each of those expansions corresponds to documented changes in the hominin fossil record. New species appearing, brain volumes increasing, stone tool technologies diversifying. The apes that became human ancestors did not choose to leave the forest left them, and in the open environment that replaced it, certain traits became worth their cost. The human brain consumes approximately 20% of the body's total energy, while accounting for roughly 2% of body mass. No other organ in the body produces a comparable imbalance. That metabolic architecture exists because, in a specific ecological context, at a specific point in geological time, the cognitive returns on that investment were high enough to justify it. The brain did not expand because bigger brains are better. It expanded because, in the open savanna of Pliocene East Africa, bigger brains produced enough additional offspring to outcompete smaller ones. Remove that context, and there is no reason to expect the same outcome. This is the part the famous illustration got wrong. Not just structurally, not just by drawing a line instead of a tree, but conceptually. Evolution does not progress toward an ultimate or proximate goal. This was documented formally by the paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould in 1989, and it remains a foundational principle of modern evolutionary biology. Evolution describes changes in inherited traits over time. The changes that accumulate are the ones that happen to help organisms survive and reproduce in their current environments. The process is, in the words of biologist Richard Dawkins, a blind watchmaker. It produces structures of extraordinary complexity without ever seeing past the immediate moment. Which brings us to the chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are not a failed draft. They are not a species that almost became something. They are the product of 6 to 7 million years of independent evolution along a completely separate path, fully optimized for the environments they occupy. A 2025 study published in Science analyzed exome sequences, the protein-coding portions of the genome, from 828 wild chimpanzees across 30 populations, spanning habitats from dense tropical rainforest to open woodland savanna. The researchers found fine-scale genetic adaptation to local habitat conditions. Different populations had developed different genetic signatures based on the specific pressures of their specific environments. Forest chimpanzees had evolved adaptations to malaria-causing pathogens mediated by the same genes underlying malaria resistance in humans. Savanna chimpanzees showed distinct thermoregulatory adaptations. The process of evolution was visibly ongoing and specific. Brianna Pabina, a paleoanthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution, put the point more directly. The reason other primates are not evolving into humans is that they are doing just fine. This is not a casual observation. It is a precise scientific statement. Natural selection has no record of where a lineage came from and no projection of where it is going. It operates on the question, does this trait in this body, in this environment, at this moment, produce more or fewer surviving offspring? Chimpanzees in Central African forests answer that question with the bodies they already have. There is no selection pressure pushing them toward bipedalism, larger brains or stone tools, because there is no survival advantage in their current environment that those traits would provide. They are, by the only metric evolution recognizes, exactly as successful as they need to be. Modern chimpanzees have existed as a distinct species for longer than modern humans have. The lineage that produced humans was not superior. It was displaced. What followed from that displacement was not one human species gradually improving until the current model was reached. It was a branching proliferation of hominin species, most of which are now extinct. At approximately 2 million years ago, at least 3 species of the genus Homo, Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, and Homo rudolfensis, coexisted in the same region around Lake Turkana in East Africa. Paleoanthropologists have no confirmed record of how these species interacted. By 300,000 years ago, at least 9 Homo species were distributed across Africa, Europe, and Asia simultaneously. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans across the Asian interior, Homo erectus in Indonesia, Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores, Homo naledi in South Africa, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, archaic Homo sapiens in Africa, and others. By 40,000 years ago, only one remained. The disappearance of these species resembles a mass extinction. There is no obvious environmental catastrophe, no volcanic eruption, no asteroid, driving the timing. The extinctions correlate with the dispersal of anatomically modern Homo sapiens out of Africa. What caused the extinction of the other human species is not definitively resolved. Competitive displacement, climate vulnerability, demographic collapse, and disease have all been proposed. The answer is likely a combination of factors that varied by species and region. What is documented is the result. One species, with traces of DNA from species that no longer exist, embedded in its genome. Non-African human populations today carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Populations in East Asia, Polynesia, and Australia carry Denisovan DNA. Multiple African populations carry genetic signatures from archaic human species that have not yet been formally identified in the fossil record. Homo sapiens did not simply replace the other human species. It encountered them, reproduced with some of them, and outlasted all of them. Whether that outcome reflects a meaningful advantage or a narrowly favourable set of contingencies is a question the science has not definitively answered. The question this video started with, why didn't monkeys become humans, contains, embedded inside it, a model of the world in which evolution is a race with a finish line. In that model, some species are winning and some are falling behind. Monkeys are falling behind. Humans won. That model is not how the mechanism works. Every species alive today is the current endpoint of an unbroken chain of survival, stretching back to the origin of life. The chain connecting a howler monkey in the Amazon to the present moment is exactly as long as the chain connecting a human in any city on Earth to the same point. Neither chain was moving toward the other. Neither chain was moving toward anything. What actually happened is both simpler and hard to hold in mind. A population of primates in Africa was pushed out of a shrinking forest by a climate that had been changing for millions of years. Some of its descendants developed traits that worked in the open environment. Those traits accumulated across millions of years and dozens of species, almost all of which went extinct. The one that remained built the cities, sequenced the genomes, and dug up the bones of the others. Whether that makes humans the point of the story, or simply the last ones left, is not a question evolution can answer.